Have you ever noticed this strange feeling? Nothing is technically wrong. Your life looks fine from the outside, but inside you feel tired, heavy, constantly pulled by people's expectations, pulled by relationships you don't know how to leave, pulled by outcomes you can't stop thinking about, pulled by the fear of losing something or someone you're already losing. And the strange part is this: no one is physically holding you down, yet you feel trapped, not by life, but by attachment.
Most people believe suffering comes from pain, from heartbreak, from failure, from rejection, from loss. But what if that's not true? What if pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional? What if the real reason you feel exhausted is not because life is hard, but because you're holding on to things that were never meant to be held forever?
Let me tell you a short story. A few years ago, I met someone who looked incredibly strong on the outside. Successful career, stable relationships, always calm, always composed. But one night, in a quiet conversation, they said something that stayed with me. They said, "I feel like my entire life is controlled by things I can't control, and I don't know how to stop." They weren't talking about money, or health, or even failure. They were talking about people. The need to be understood, the fear of disappointing others, the anxiety of losing approval, the obsession with outcomes they couldn't guarantee. And that's when it became clear. Their suffering wasn't caused by life. It was caused by attachment.
This is where Buddhism offers something quietly revolutionary. Not escape, not detachment as coldness, but detachment as freedom. A way of living where people's moods no longer control your peace. Outcomes no longer dictate your self-worth. Fear no longer decides your choices. And nothing outside you owns your inner world. Today, I want to share with you the deeper truth about detachment, not as a philosophy to admire, but as a skill you can actually practice.
In this video, you'll discover why most people suffer not because life hurts, but because they cling. How seeking validation quietly hands your power to others. The difference between healthy love and emotional attachment. Why letting go doesn't make you cold, it makes you whole. And how detaching from outcomes is often the moment life starts working with you. This is not about giving up. It's about taking your power back.
So before we talk about letting go, we need to understand one crucial truth. A truth most people never question, because once you see it clearly, you can never unsee it again. Let's begin with this. You don't suffer because life is painful. You suffer because your mind refuses to release. And that's exactly where our journey starts.
Let's begin with a distinction most people never learn to make. There is pain, and then there is suffering. Pain is unavoidable. Suffering is optional. This might sound strange at first, especially in a culture that teaches us to avoid pain at all costs. But Buddhism makes a quiet, powerful claim. Pain is what happens to you. Suffering is what your mind does with it. And the bridge between the two is attachment.
Pain is natural. A breakup hurts. Losing a job hurts. Being rejected hurts. Growing older hurts. No philosophy can remove pain from life. But suffering begins when the mind says, "This shouldn't have happened. They were supposed to stay. My life was supposed to look different. I can't accept this." That inner resistance, that refusal to release, is attachment. Attachment is not love. Attachment is not caring. Attachment is the demand that reality must obey your expectations. And reality never does. Most suffering comes from three common attachments. First, Attachment to people. You're not suffering because someone left. You're suffering because you attached your identity, your safety, or your future to their presence. You didn't just love them, you needed them to stay the same. And when they changed, your inner world collapsed. Second, attachment to identity. I'm the successful one. I'm the reliable one. I'm the strong one. So when failure appears or uncertainty enters, it doesn't just hurt, it threatens who you think you are. Third, attachment to outcomes. You didn't just want something, you decided you needed it to turn out a certain way in order to be okay. And when life chose another direction, anxiety took over.
Think about a breakup. Two people experience the same event, separation. One feels pain and slowly heals. The other feels pain and then spirals. Why? Because the second person isn't just grieving the relationship, they're clinging to a story. They were my future. I won't be okay without them. This loss defines me. The suffering isn't caused by the person who left. It's caused by the attachment to who they were supposed to be. The same is true with careers. Losing a job hurts, but suffering comes from believing, if I'm not successful, I'm nothing. If I fail, I failed as a person. Again, attachment.
Here's the mistake most people make. They think letting go means not caring. But Buddhism never teaches indifference. It teaches non-clinging. You can care deeply without chaining your peace to something that can disappear. You can love fully without demanding permanence from what is temporary. Attachment says, I need this to stay the same for me to be okay. Detachment says, I can appreciate this while it's here and still be whole if it changes.
Here's a small truth you can carry with you. You don't suffer because life is painful. You suffer because your mind refuses to release what is already changing. The moment you see this, something softens inside. You stop fighting reality. You stop arguing with what already is. And your energy returns to you.
But here's the next question, and it's a crucial one. If attachment creates suffering, why do we cling so tightly in the first place? Why do we give people, opinions, and outcomes so much power over our inner world? The answer is simpler and more uncomfortable than most people expect. Because attachment often hides behind one quiet need: the need to be validated. And that's exactly what we'll explore next.
There is a reason attachment feels so hard to release. Because beneath most attachments, there is a quiet hunger. Not for love, not for success, but for validation. The need to be seen, to be chosen, to be approved of, to feel that you matter in someone else's eyes. And most people never realize this. The moment your sense of worth depends on external validation, you quietly hand control of your inner world to others.
Validation itself isn't wrong. We are social beings. Connection matters. Feedback can be helpful. But when validation becomes a requirement instead of a bonus, it turns into a leash. Now your emotional state is no longer self-directed. A compliment lifts you. A criticism shakes you. Silence makes you anxious. Rejection feels unbearable. Without anyone trying to control you, you become controllable. Not because people are powerful, but because your worth is outsourced. Think about how many decisions are shaped by validation. You hesitate to speak honestly at work, not because you're unsure, but because you fear how you'll be perceived. You stay in a relationship that drains you, not because it fulfills you, but because the idea of being unwanted feels worse. You scroll through social media, measuring your value in likes, views, attention. No one forces this, but slowly, quietly, your self-worth becomes conditional. And anything conditional can be taken away.
Here's how control actually happens. If someone knows you crave approval, they don't need to threaten you. They can withhold attention, offer praise selectively, use silence as pressure, frame disappointment as guilt, and you'll adjust yourself. You'll soften your truth, shrink your boundaries, over-explain your choices, stay quiet when you should speak. Not because they demand it, but because you fear losing validation. This is how people lose themselves without ever being directly controlled.
Most people think confidence means being liked, but real confidence is something else entirely. It's being okay with misunderstanding. It's being okay with disapproval. It's being okay with not being chosen, because your worth is no longer negotiated. When you seek validation, you perform. When you stop seeking it, you exist.
Here's a truth that quietly changes everything. People can only control you if you are afraid of losing their approval. The moment approval becomes optional, manipulation loses its grip. Praise becomes pleasant, not necessary. Criticism becomes information, not identity. Rejection becomes redirection, not rejection of self. And something powerful happens. You stop asking, do they approve of me? And you start asking, do I approve of myself in this moment?
But knowing this isn't enough. Because even when we understand attachment and validation, the heart doesn't automatically release. Letting go doesn't happen once. It happens again and again and again. Which leads us to the next truth. Detachment is not a belief. It is not a mindset. It is not something time magically fixes. Detachment is a skill. And like any skill, it can be practiced, trained, and strengthened. That's where we go next.
Most people think letting go is something that just happens. They say, give it time. You'll get over it. It will fade. But time doesn't release attachment. Awareness does. Detachment isn't an event. It's not a decision you make once and never revisit. Detachment is a skill. And like any skill, it only grows through practice. Attachment doesn't live in logic. You can understand something is unhealthy and still feel pulled toward it. Because attachment is stored in the nervous system. It's a habit of thought, a reflex of emotion, a loop the mind has practiced for years. So telling yourself, I should let go, rarely works. The mind doesn't release through force. It releases through repetition with awareness.
Think about the last time you felt triggered. Maybe someone didn't reply. Maybe a comment stayed with you longer than it should have. Maybe an old memory resurfaced without warning. In that moment, you probably didn't choose to obsess. Your mind simply returned to a familiar place. That's attachment in motion. Not because you're weak, but because the habit is strong.
Here's a simple practice that turns detachment into something real. Not dramatic, not spiritual, just honest. Step 1. Notice. The moment you feel pulled, pause. Not to judge, just to observe. Step 2. Name. Quietly say, this is attachment. This is fear. This is my need for control. Naming breaks the trance. Step 3. Return. Bring attention back to what's real right now. Your breath, your body, the action in front of you. You're not suppressing the feeling. You're refusing to feed it. And every time you do this, the attachment weakens. Just a little.
You're waiting for a message. Your mind keeps checking, creating stories, replaying conversations. Instead of following the loop, you pause.
This is attachment to a reassurance. You breathe. You return to what you're doing. The urge doesn't vanish instantly, but you didn't obey it. That's training, and training compounds. Many people think detachment means emotional numbness, but detachment isn't about not feeling. It's about not being dragged. You still feel sadness. You still feel desire. You still feel longing, but you're no longer owned by them. Another mistake is waiting to feel ready to let go. Readiness comes after practice, not before. Here's a gentle truth. You don't let go all at once. You let go moment by moment. Each time you notice without reacting, each time you choose presence over obsession, you reclaim a piece of yourself. Detachment isn't losing something. It's returning to yourself. But as you practice detachment, another question naturally arises. If I stop clinging, if I stop chasing reassurance, if I stop trying to control outcomes, what should I focus on instead? Where does my responsibility end? And where does life take over? To answer that, we need to understand one of the most liberating distinctions you can ever make. What is within your control and what never was. That's where we go next. As you begin to practice detachment, something becomes very clear. Most of your exhaustion doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from trying to control things that were never yours to control. We spend an incredible amount of energy managing opinions, predicting outcomes, rehearsing conversations that haven't happened yet, and quietly, this drains us. There are two parts of life: what you can influence and what you can't. The problem is, most anxiety lives exactly where control ends. You can't control how people feel about you. You can't control whether someone stays. You can't control how life unfolds. But attachment convinces the mind that if it just tries harder, worries more, thinks longer, it can bend reality. It can't. Control is an illusion the mind uses to feel safe in uncertainty. Think about a job interview. You prepare, you show up, you do your best, and then you wait. In that waiting, the mind spirals. What did they think? Did I say the wrong thing? What if I ruined my chance? None of that changes the outcome, but it steals your peace. The effort was yours. The result never was. Here's a simple way to see it. What's yours? Your effort? Your honesty? Your boundaries? Your response? What was never yours? Other people's reactions? Timing? Outcomes? Life's direction? Suffering begins when we reverse these two. We neglect what's ours and obsess over what isn't. In dating, people try to control interest. They text carefully, they wait strategically, they read into silence. But attraction isn't something you can manage. All you can control is authenticity. In entrepreneurship, people try to control success. They obsess over numbers, validation, comparisons. But growth comes from consistent effort, not guaranteed outcomes. The more you chase control, the less grounded you become. Many people think releasing control means giving up. But there's a difference between surrender and passivity. You don't stop acting. You stop gripping. You still prepare. You still show up. You still care. You just don't demand a specific result as the price of your peace.
Here's a truth worth remembering. Power comes from disciplined action. Peace
comes from released outcomes. When you focus on what's yours, your energy becomes clean. No desperation, no resentment, no inner negotiation with life. Just presence and effort.
But even when we understand control intellectually, something still trips us up. Emotions. A comment triggers us, a tone changes, an old wound opens. And before we realize it, we react, not from clarity, but from impulse. So the next step in detachment is learning something subtle but powerful. Not every emotion deserves a reaction. That's where we go next.
There is a quiet misunderstanding many of us grow up with. We're taught that being honest means expressing everything we feel, that authenticity means reacting in the moment, that emotions should be followed, not questioned. But emotional maturity teaches something very different. Feeling is not the same as acting, and wisdom lives in the space between the two. Emotions are information. They tell you something is happening inside, but they are not instructions. An emotion can rise without requiring a response. Anger can appear without needing expression. Sadness can be present without defining your next move. Most suffering doesn't come from what we feel. It comes from what we do immediately after we feel it. Think about a time someone said something that triggered you. Maybe it was a dismissive comment, a critical tone, a reminder of an old wound. Before you even realized it, your body reacted. Tension, heat, a rush of words forming in your mind. In that moment, the reaction feels justified. But hours later, sometimes minutes later, you wish you had paused. Not because the feeling was wrong, but because the reaction wasn't wise. Here's the skill most people never practice: the pause. Between stimulus and response, there is a brief moment. A breath, a heartbeat, a choice. This pause is where freedom lives. When you pause, you give yourself time to remember. This feeling will pass. I don't need to solve this now. I can choose how I respond. You're not suppressing emotion. You're allowing it to move without taking control. An email upsets you. Your fingers move toward the keyboard. Instead of reacting, you stop. You take one breath, then another. You don't send anything. Later, with clarity, you respond, or decide not to. The outcome is different, the relationship is different, and most importantly, you are different. Many people believe restraint means repression, but repression is unconscious. Pause is conscious. Repression buries emotion. Pause witnesses it. Another mistake is thinking calm people don't feel deeply. They do. They just don't outsource their power to every passing emotion. Here's a truth worth holding gently. You don't gain strength by reacting faster. You gain strength by choosing when not to react. Each time you pause, you step out of old patterns. You stop being predictable. And that changes everything. As you practice this, noticing emotion without reacting, something unexpected happens. People begin to reveal themselves, not because you confront them, but because you stop adjusting yourself for them. When you no longer react the way you used to, the truth becomes visible. And that leads us to the next realization. Detachment reveals truth about others and about yourself. That's where we go next.
There's something subtle that happens when you stop clinging. You don't confront people. You don't demand explanations. You don't force clarity. You simply stop chasing. And in that stillness, the truth begins to surface. Not because you went looking for it, but because you stopped interfering with it. Attachment distorts perception. When you're attached, you interpret everything through hope or fear. You excuse behavior. You fill in silence with stories. You explain away patterns you don't want to see. But detachment removes the filter. It doesn't create distance, it creates clarity. Without effort, you begin to see people as they are, not as you wish them to be. Think about a relationship where you are always the one reaching out, texting first, checking in, making plans. At some point you stop, not as a test, not to provoke a reaction, just to rest. And something happens. Either the connection balances or it fades. That outcome isn't cruel, it's honest. Detachment didn't break the relationship, it revealed what was already there. When you stop over-functioning, others show you their natural level of investment. When you stop explaining yourself, people reveal whether they respect your boundaries. When you stop chasing, you see who actually walks toward you. This can be painful, but it's also freeing, because confusion ends where clarity begins. Detachment doesn't only reveal others, it reveals you. You begin to notice where you abandon yourself, where you compromise out of fear, where you stay because leaving feels scary. This awareness isn't meant to shame you, it's meant to empower you. You finally see your patterns, and patterns can be changed. Some people think detachment is a test. If I pull away, will they chase? That's not detachment. That's manipulation wearing a calm mask. Real detachment has no agenda. It's not about getting a reaction. It's about removing yourself from cycles that cost you your peace. Here's a truth that takes time to accept. What's real doesn't require chasing. What requires chasing isn't stable. Detachment doesn't make you lose what's meant for you. It helps you stop losing yourself. But at this point, many people feel uneasy. They worry. If I stop clinging, if I stop chasing, if I stop explaining myself, won't I become cold? This fear is understandable. So before we go further, we need to clear up a misunderstanding that holds many people back. Detachment is not coldness. It is emotional maturity. That's what we'll explore next.
At this stage, many people hesitate. They feel the relief that detachment brings, but they're afraid of where it might lead. They ask quietly, if I stop clinging, if I stop chasing, if I stop needing reassurance, won't I become cold? Won't I stop caring? This fear is understandable because many of us were taught that intensity equals love. But emotional maturity tells a different story. Attachment is driven by fear, fear of loss, fear of abandonment, fear of being alone. Detachment is driven by choice. You stay not because you're afraid to leave. You care not because you need something back. You love without demanding permanence. Detachment doesn't shut the heart, it steadies it. Attachment says, I need you to feel safe. Detachment says, I feel safe and I choose you. Attachment panics when things change. Detachment adapts. Attachment confuses intensity with depth. Detachment allows depth without chaos. This is not less love, it's cleaner love. Think about a healthy relationship you've seen. Not dramatic, not emotionally exhausting, just steady, respectful, present. There is care, but no desperation, affection, but no control. That calm isn't emptiness, it's security. That's what detachment looks like in real life. In parenting, attachment tries to control outcomes. Detachment guides, supports, and lets go. In friendships, attachment keeps score. Detachment offers presence without expectation. In love, attachment fears distance. Detachment trusts connection. Many people mistake detachment for emotional withdrawal, but withdrawal is avoidance. Detachment is engagement without self-betrayal. Coldness shuts people out. Detachment keeps the heart open without giving away the keys. Here's a gentle truth. You don't lose love by detaching, you lose fear. And when fear leaves, what remains is something quieter and far more stable. As you grow into this kind of emotional maturity, something else begins to shift. You stop feeling the need to constantly explain yourself, to justify your choices, to convince others of your truth. And this is where inner authority is born. Because the more detached you become, the less you seek permission to be who you are. That's what we'll explore next, why stopping self-explanation is one of the most powerful forms of detachment.
There's a moment many people reach as they begin to detach. They notice something surprising. They talk less, explain less, defend themselves less. Not because they don't care, but because something inside them has settled. They no longer feel the need to earn permission to exist. Most over-explaining doesn't come from clarity. It comes from fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of disappointing others, fear of being judged or rejected. So we justify, we over-contextualize, we soften our truth until it's barely recognizable. And slowly, we give away our authority. Because the more you explain yourself, the more you imply that others get to decide whether your choices are valid. Think about a time you made a decision that felt right to you. Maybe you changed careers, ended a relationship, chose a different path than expected. Notice how quickly explanations followed. You weren't sharing, you were defending. And the exhaustion that came after didn't come from the decision. It came from negotiating your truth with people who weren't living your life. There's a difference between communication and justification. Communication is offered freely. Justification is offered out of fear. Emotionally mature people still communicate. They just don't explain themselves to feel acceptable. They don't need consensus to trust their inner compass. You set a boundary. Instead of a long explanation, you say, "This doesn't work for me." And you stop. Some people understand, some don't. But your peace remains intact. That silence isn't arrogance. It's self-trust. Many people think not explaining is rude, but clarity doesn't require oversharing. You don't owe everyone access to your reasoning. You owe yourself honesty. Detachment doesn't make you secretive. It makes you selective. Here's a truth worth sitting with. You don't need permission to live in alignment with yourself. When you stop explaining, you reclaim your inner authority. And when authority comes from within, validation loses its grip. But there's one last attachment that keeps many people stuck. The belief that if they just try harder, love better, explain more, they can change someone else. This belief feels compassionate, but it quietly delays healing. So before we close, we need to face a difficult truth. Healing begins when you stop trying to change people who are not ready to change. That's where we go next.
There is one attachment that hides behind kindness. It sounds loving. It feels responsible. It even looks compassionate. The belief that if you just try harder, love better, explain more clearly, someone else will finally change. This belief keeps many people stuck far longer than they realize. Wanting to help isn't wrong. Caring deeply isn't wrong. But there is a quiet line between compassion and self-betrayal. You cross it the moment your peace depends on someone else's growth. You can support someone, you can encourage them, you can hold space, but you cannot do their inner work for them, and trying to do so slowly drains you. Think about someone you kept hoping would change. You saw their potential. You believed in the version of them that appeared only occasionally. So you stayed. You explained. You adjusted. You forgave the same patterns again and again. Not because you were weak, but because you were hopeful. But hope, when disconnected from reality, becomes a form of attachment. Change only happens when someone feels ready, not when they're convinced, not when they're pressured, not when they're loved harder. You can't heal someone who doesn't want to look at their wounds, and every attempt to rescue them pulls you further away from yourself. Detachment here isn't abandonment. It's respect, for them and for you. In relationships, this shows up as, if they just healed their trauma, if they finally understood how much I care, if I said it the right way. In families, it shows up as guilt. In friendships, it shows up as overgiving. But healing begins the moment you stop asking, "How do I change them?" and start asking, "What is this costing me?" Many people fear that letting go is selfish, but staying in cycles that harm you is not kindness. It's fear disguised as loyalty. Detachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop carrying what isn't yours. Here's a truth that softens and strengthens at the same time.
You are not responsible for someone else's awakening. You are responsible for your own. And sometimes, the most compassionate act is stepping back. When you stop trying to change people, something remarkable happens. Your energy returns, your clarity sharpens, your life begins to move again. And that brings us to the final piece of detachment, the one that ties everything together, letting go of outcomes and trusting life to meet you halfway. That's where our journey ends.
At this point in the journey, something important has shifted. You've seen how attachment creates suffering, how validation hands away your power, how detachment is practiced, not forced, how clarity replaces confusion, how emotional maturity feels quieter but stronger. And now we arrive at the final attachment, the one that shapes almost every anxiety we carry. Attachment to outcomes. Most people don't just want something. They need it to turn out a certain way in order to feel safe. I'll be okay when this works. I'll relax once I know the result. I'll be happy if this happens. But here's the quiet truth. Life rarely unfolds according to our timelines. And when peace is postponed into the future, the present is lived in tension. Outcome attachment keeps you anxious, even when you're doing your best. Think about a moment in your life when things didn't go as planned. A job you didn't get. A relationship that ended. A door that closed unexpectedly. At the time, it felt like failure. But years later, you may have realized that ending redirected you. That loss reshaped you. That delay protected you. Life wasn't working against you. It was working beyond what you could see. Detaching from outcomes doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop demanding certainty as the price of effort. You still show up fully. You still act with intention. You still plant seeds. But you release the illusion that you control the harvest. This is where effort becomes clean. No desperation. No resentment. No silent bargaining with life. Just presence and trust. In your career, detachment looks like this. You work with integrity, not obsession over promotion. In relationships, it looks like this. You love honestly, without forcing permanence. In personal growth, it looks like this. You commit to the process, without rushing the outcome. And paradoxically, this is often when things begin to flow, because tension dissolves, and clarity returns. Many people think detaching from outcomes means whatever happens, happens. But that's resignation. Detachment is different. It's engaged action without emotional gripping. You act wholeheartedly. Then you release. And in that release, life has room to move. Here's a truth to carry with you. Effort without attachment is one of the most powerful forces in life. When you stop clinging to results, you become resilient. When you stop arguing with reality, you become adaptable. When you stop demanding guarantees, you become free. Detachment doesn't make life smaller. It makes it lighter. You still feel. You still care. You still dream.
But nothing outside you owns your peace. And perhaps that is the deepest freedom Buddhism points to. Not escaping life, but finally meeting it with fear. Thank you for walking this journey with me. And remember, you don't let go to lose. You let go to live.